G'day, I'm Nick Clements from YourQS and welcome to our podcast Beyond the Guesstimate, where we explore the concept of cost-informing design. I've been in the construction sector since 1993 and pretty much that whole time I've been frustrated about the inefficiencies and how the industry operates. When I say efficiency, I'm not talking about building buildings at the lowest possible cost or the smallest design or trying to cut corners. I'm talking about establishing what the outcomes the clients want and then ensuring that we're able to get them those outcomes at the best possible cost. So it's not about cutting corners. It's not about doing things cheap. It's about doing things well. I think back to, I was on a holiday in Belgium once, staying with some friends and stayed in an old Belgium farmhouse. And it was just a rectangle, 3 stories, attic loft. And there was just so much space inside it. And it sort of stuck in my mind that that's actually a really efficient house. It was rectangular. The depth of the rectangle was about the span of the joists for the floor on the mid-floor or the rafters. So really efficient from that point of view. There's only 4 corners, and every time you add a corner, that adds cost. Had a simple gable roof, so rafters in that case because it was a pretty old building. Nowadays, we'd use trusses. And that would actually end up with a really low cost per square metre because of that really simple design. Now, a whole suburb full of those sort of style buildings would be pretty boring. But I think in New Zealand, we go a bit too far the other way, that we end up with these really complex shapes, lots of corners, really complex roofs, and add a whole lot of cost to it. So I don't know whether the outcome really is worth the extra cost that we put into that design. And design's where it's at. The decisions the designer makes around the shape of the buildings, the materials that are being used, has a really big impact on the cost. And I know it's one of the challenges for designers is matching what the client wants to achieve with what their budget is and making the whole thing fit together. And so that's a big part of the role that we play at YourQS, is working with designers early in the process and helping them understand the cost. But it's also really important that designers themselves appreciate the impact of those design decisions that they're making. And so working with a designer that's got a good understanding of the design aesthetics, so we don't just end up with a whole lot of really basic boxes that are boring. They might be cost effective, but they're boring. So it's sort of walking that line between something that's interesting to look at, interesting to live in, but still cost effective. So today my guest is Sharon Robinson from Smart Living Spaces. She's one of these designers that understands those relationships. So we've been working a bit on and off with Sharon over the last little while. So I'd like to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
How did you get into designing in the first place?
Oh my gosh, I was drawing house plans at the age of 7. I didn't know what architecture was. Dad was a lawyer, Mum was a nurse. I grew up in a rural property. But it's just something that was obviously just something that was with me. And then when I was 18, my mother took me to career guidance counselling, and through a process of going through the evaluations, it turned out that architecture was probably well suited towards my personality, which was good to know. And then just started on the journey. I took the scenic route really with my career, but
so did you go into study straight away, or
when I was when I was 19, I enrolled in Polytech down in Hamilton, and so did the 2 years. When you're at that age, you can't wait to go overseas and do your OE and live life, and came back to New Zealand in 2004 and said, right, I still really love this architecture stuff. I've been working in landscape architecture in the UK. And so then enrolled part-time at Unitec here in Auckland, and over the next 4 years, part-time, got my Bachelor of Architectural Studies. Okay. And of course, my learning hasn't stopped there. I've done Homestar training, obviously, and become a certified passive house designer. So yes, it's been continual learning and growing and evolving in architecture.
So when you were studying part-time for your degree, were you working in architecture while you were doing that? Or?
I was, which is why I had to do it part-time.
Yeah,
I was actually working in Hamilton, so I was driving up to Auckland one day a week, and I told myself that because I was sort of hitting the road to go back home at about 7 o'clock at night, and so they were long days. And I said, if I get in the car and I'm driving home without a smile on my face or not believing in what I'm doing, then it's time to call it quits. And that day never came.
Well, that's pretty good for 4 years
Lucky.
Of what must have been pretty trying times.
Yeah, but architecture for me has always pulled me through the tough times because it's something that I believe in, and it's something that has rewarded me too. So it's something I turn to, I suppose, when times get tough.
So you were working for a practice, I presume?
I was. I was working at that time for two practices, not at the same time. I was working for Chapel Architects for a while, and then when I was finishing my studies, I ended up working for Antanas Pursuit Architects, who is now called Power Architects.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And both in Hamilton?
Both in Hamilton. Very different practices. Chapel was very much more commercial, and Antanas had a focus on sort of high-end residential, which is really where I liked to be. So, yeah.
But I guess for somebody learning their trade, working for practices like that, so obviously Chapel's pretty well known around the place.
Yes.
It must have been a great learning ground for you.
Yeah, I had sort of commercial from car dealerships to hospital work to, and then the high-end residential to sort of Antanas is where I sort of realised more of my sustainability aspirations. So it was really beneficial to get a broad range of those experiences because I've learned from all of them and pulled all of them into my own practice.
So at what point did you decide that you were going to do your own thing and get out on your own?
What do they say? Life happens to your best laid plans. I never really thought I would ever have my own practice. It wasn't something that was in my ethos. But after 15 years being quite determined and ambitious, I guess I hit a bit of a glass ceiling. I also have these sustainability aspirations when it comes to sort of sustainable design and planet-friendly design. And I really loved the focus on people and just that I didn't find a job that gave me everything that I wanted. So eventually in 2014, it was it's time to leap, not look, and just figure it out and give it a go. And it's the longest job I've ever had. So it turns out it wasn't such a bad thing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my journey was a little bit different. So I worked for a big corporate, Carter Holt Harvey, and I got ejected from Carter Holt Harvey. And I wasn't one of these people that had an aspiration. You know, some people were just dying to get into their own business. I was happy doing what I was doing. But when I got that nudge to go find something else to do, I had to think about it. And myself and one of the other guys that were working there decided to start our own business. And that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, and you haven't looked back since.
Yeah, and it's I think I'd be unemployable now, to be honest, to go and work for somebody else. But it's definitely has its pluses and minuses. It has its stresses 100%. That you don't get in working for somebody else. But it has for me, it's given me the opportunity to pursue my dream, which I don't think I would have been able to if I'd carried on working for a corporate in particular.
100%. My story is very similar to that, is that, I don't think anybody would employ me now because, you kind of, you find your own way and you find your own path. But yeah, very similar to you. So
what is it you enjoy most about what you do in your business now?
I still love design, really do, the creativity of it. But what I enjoy, what I get the most reward out of is making a positive difference in people's lives. I know it sounds really cheesy, but one of my drivers is to create healthy, comfortable, energy-efficient homes for everyday people and also affordable. And you know this. This is it's a balancing act, and we're still learning how to get it better. But I really want architecture for people. I really want to make a positive difference in their lives. And homes are our largest financial investment that many of us make in our lifetime. So I kind of view my role as also being a financial advisor in a sense, because you have the ability to have a profound impact on these people's lives, not just financially, but also from a health perspective, from a quality of life perspective. And it's doing my job and doing it well and solving problems for people in ways that maybe they hadn't thought was possible.
Yeah, I think it's something I've come to appreciate, and probably more so in the last couple of years when we've been doing more comparative work, is just how much of life is trade-offs, is making you can't have everything all of the time. And so you've got to make a decision about whether it's risk reward or cost versus quality or functionality or size. There's always trade-offs involved. And I think very much in the construction and the design space is trying to navigate your way through those trade-offs.
100%. And it's about empowering people to make informed decisions and knowing what that is. And it's not always a black and white process, and it can be quite messy. So it's just about, empowering people and finding a way forward for them.
Yeah. Mm. So with Smart Living Spaces then, so that's a brand. Has your business been called that all along? Or is it
has.
Okay, right. Yeah. So you're very much at the forefront of that sort of space. So what's the sort of ethos, the driving thinking behind what you're doing with smart living spaces?
So I called it Smart Living Spaces. I actually wanted Living Spaces, but I found out there was a company that went bankrupt that was called Living Spaces, and I thought that's not a very good way to start your business, Sharon. And it was actually a conversation with a friend of mine, and he said something about we just need to get smart about what we do, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll put that little word in front of it. But I didn't want architecture. I didn't want my name in it. I wanted to keep it open. I wanted to kind of back myself because, I wasn't quite sure what I was doing. I was entering this self-employment business world. But also we live in spaces. So if we think about architecture, I didn't want it to seem like an object. I wanted to get into what we were creating with that sort of envelope and with the enclosure. And it's something that at architecture school, it was actually something I was criticized in a studio project for. A tutor said to me, you're looking at these buildings as objects in the landscape. You're not considering about the spaces that they're creating and spaces in between. So I think that kind of really struck a chord and resonated with me. And so started Smart Living Spaces. And it was the tagline started out as architectural design with people in mind. And I felt like I could change that after I did my passive house training to say architectural design with people and planet in mind, because then I felt like I had empowered myself enough with the tools to be able to integrate that sustainability into what I was doing from a planet point of view. That was where it all started, and I've never found the need to change it.
Obviously, it's a good fit with, I think, where the current market is, so it probably was a bit ahead of its time, I guess, when you first started out, but certainly it seems to be, the sector does seem to be moving that way. So you mentioned passive houses and sustainability. So how does all that work? So what is a passive house? What's defined as a passive house, and how is it different from what other people are doing?
Well, it shouldn't be different to what other people are doing. But so passive house, for those people who don't know, is a international voluntary standard. It was developed in the late 80s, early 90s in Germany. And it's perceived probably as being only suitable for cold climates, but it is a standard that means that there are benchmarks in terms of performance that a building has to meet in order to comply with that. So, for example, the interior environment should be between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius. There's overheating restrictions. There's power restrictions too, so it becomes incredibly efficient to live in. They are more expensive to build, obviously, but that's compared to the baseline bare sort of minimum box, the very least you can legally get away with. And it's coming into its own at the moment because Scotland is looking at their building code in terms of the Building for Climate program that everyone is running worldwide to get to net zero carbon by 2050. And they've been working with the Passive House Institute to integrate Passive House into their building code. So it is an alternative to H1 energy efficiency in our building code.
So how long have you been sort of actively in the passive space?
Since 2022, so new arrival, but once converted, you never go back.
So what's your feel as to how the market's changed in that time since you get into it? And I guess seeing it's relatively recent, what was your thinking with why you decided to sort of jump in with the passive thing? Because obviously you had an interest in sustainability way back. So what tipped it from what you were doing into the passive space?
So a bit of an admission here. Like at first I went, we don't need passive houses in New Zealand. What are you talking about, And then I got into Homestar and I was sitting there and I was thinking, this passive house thing, you need to look at it. You need to look at it because you don't know what you don't know. And then I did my Homestar designer training, which is a little bit along the lines of passive house and building science. And then I went, it's time to leap. You've got to do this, Sharon. You've got to jump into it. And I can remember getting into about the third week of it and I went, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. I've been designing for 22 years and I just don't know what I'm doing. I had a bit of a meltdown. But by the time I came out of it, I understood it and it just changed the way I designed. It changed the way I approached my projects. It changed the entire thinking process that silently goes on in your head when you're designing. And I'm better off for it. Yeah.
So you mentioned Homestar. What's the difference between Passive House and Homestar? So how does Homestar fit in with these landscape of these words around this space?
Good question. So they're not the same and you don't have to choose between one or the other. I think we have this kind of mentality of it's one or the other without understanding how they integrate. So Homestar is a New Zealand rating system that is based around sort of people, planet, and profit, the triple bottom line. So it's a holistic approach. It's also quite well geared and positioned for our Building for Climate Change program, and when that comes back on board, and dealing with operating carbon and embodied carbon. Also climate resilience. So it has a number of credits that it spans. It can suit a number of typologies, residential, not commercial. So Green Star does the commercial side.
Okay.
About 30% of Homestar is around health, comfort, and energy efficiency, whereas 100% of Passive House is around health, comfort, and energy efficiency. So they work together. In fact, the work that the New Zealand Green Building Council, who have Homestar, the work that they've done for their energy modelling, for their software for their energy modelling, has actually been done in coordination with the Passive House Institute. So there's an incredible amount of collaboration that's gone on behind the scenes. So yeah, it's a rating system. It's
so if a house is passive, does it automatically make it Homestar?
No. So Homestar 10 sits on the same operating level as a passive house. You can use your passive house certification to get points for Homestar. So they talk to one another, but they operate independently.
So is the Homestar a bit more holistic, I'm feeling?
Definitely.
So the passive house is sort of more around the pure energy performance of the house.
Purely around the
Homestar
operating
takes
energy.
it a bit further in terms of other aspects?
Other aspects. So, waste management. Homestar also can unlock lower interest rates from ANZ with their Healthy Homes loans. So it's New Zealand focused, addressing New Zealand local issues. It also acts as a ladder, I guess, between the optimum levels of Passive House and where our building code is sitting. So Homestar 6 would be above the building code in terms of operating levels, but Homestar 10 would be closer to Passive House levels, which is ultimately where we will be going.
So we've got a number of builders that talk about building high-performing homes. So that it sounds like another thing. Does that mean something specific, or is it just broadly they're doing better than the average, but not necessarily Homestar or passive?
Yeah, high performance is an interesting term. So it just means better than code. We don't know how much better than code. So Homestar is a system that would be able to tell you how much better than code, I suppose, if you wanted some comparison on where you were sitting. Yeah.
So implication of what you're saying is code minimum is bad. So is that right?
In my opinion, it is. I might get shot in the foot for saying this. I have this, and I stole this from someone. So full disclosure, it's not mine. But I say it a lot. I just say that the building code creates a worst performing building legally allowed to be built, and people kind of look at you and go, "No, that's not quite true. It's built for innovation. There's innovative pathways." But what's happened is industry norms have treated the acceptable solutions in our building code as being just what you do. And so we've sort of got this baseline minimum, like people wanting to build a new home and wanting it for as cheap as possible and saying, that means it's still quality. There are big gaps within our building code in terms of building performance that it's falling short of. So if you only use the building code, if you treat the building code as a design guide, you are going to create the worst performing building legally able to be built. And the public actually believe that the building code will create a healthy, comfortable home. And the reality is that that's not always the case, and that's not a guarantee.
Yeah. I get what you're saying, but obviously whenever there's a code, if that's the minimum, then whatever you do to that code is going to be the legal minimum for what you can do.
Yeah.
I'll take a bit more convincing that is necessarily a bad thing, but I do accept that there's some gaps within the code. And particularly, I know air tightness ventilation is one, and it's a massive hole, figuratively and literally, in the code. Is that addressing the thermal performance with H1 is one thing, but if you're not addressing air tightness as well, it's somewhat wasted. So, and at least with Homestar and passive, that it's viewing the house as a holistic thing as opposed to slices of it being treated.
I think this is where we're falling short in the code, is that we're treating everything as separate acceptable solutions for each space,
and then we hope they all go together. Whereas a home is we wouldn't divide a car into pieces and then evaluate its performance. So I think this is where we're falling short. Hopefully, with the schedule method being removed as an option,
I think the big thing that we don't consider in our buildings is where they're located, what the altitude is, what the actual climate is, because we've got these 6 magic climate zones. And then how that actual design is going to perform. Because we've got
orientation,
amount of glazing, all of that.
Yeah, the amount of wind. We live on the front of a hill looking out over the Manukau, wind up over the top. Yeah. It's going to be quite different to say somebody on, they might be 100 metres away on the other side of the hill is going to be quite a different environment to where we are.
Absolutely. And it's designing for that site specificness. And I think our code has made it too easy for a check the box kind of, I don't think it's H1 energy efficiency, not H1 insulation in buildings. So I think by changing energy modelling and bringing that in as mandatory, that's going to be a game changer to start to open things up. But if you give people an easy path, most people are going to take that. I mean, E2AS1, not to get too much in the weeds, but E2AS1 also has generic details that many manufacturers and suppliers hang their hat on with their documentation, and BCAs rely on it. So we've kind of got stuck in this little rut of status quo, and we just need to find a way to get ourselves out of it. And so Homestar is a nice little way of stepping up. And of course, Passive House is obviously the ultimate. So
how have you seen Homestar perceived in the market with clients? Like, with Green Star, we're seeing in the commercial building space, particularly international tenants wanting Green Star rated buildings to achieve their global objectives from a green perspective. Are we seeing that same sort of move starting to occur with homeowners wanting better performing houses and wanting to see Homestar?
Yes, I have seen interest in builders and developers, mostly around that finance option from ANZ, because we know building is expensive, and also we know that it's hard to move houses at the moment. So I think when we hit a pain point, that's when we start to think about alternative solutions. So there's been a bit of interest with that. There's also developer finance that Homestar can unlock. From homeowners, I have people come to me wanting a better than code home in any case, because they know that's what I do. But when I say, look, you can get an ANZ home loan for this, and then waste minimisation is a big one at the moment. Builders, dumping fees, all of that is becoming a big thing. So, and I sell Homestar to clients to say, if you have a design that is better than code, but your builder makes changes on site that still keeps it above code or still satisfies code, council aren't going to be the guardrails to stop that from happening. They're only there for compliance. So Homestar is a great way of being able to say, this is what the design is. It's independently certified, so there's an accountability that's lifting you above those bare minimums.
And ensuring the outcome that you're getting is actually what you started
100% is what you intended to right from the start,
So what's your typical process then when you've got a client? So if a client approaches you, how do you go about engaging them and working through the process with them?
The whole process. So say if you would come to me and you were saying, Sharon, can you please design me a house? We'd have a phone call first of all, because I want to work out if I can help you, and you want to get a sense of what I'm like to work with. Trust and a sense of connection with someone is really important when you're going on this journey, because it's a big financial commitment.
And it's a multi-month or year commitment. You're going to be working together.
Yeah, you want to be able to know that you can actually have potentially some uncomfortable conversations with this person. Then the first step is a design consultation. So I go away and I do some research on your site, because I want to know what I'm dealing with. I want to be able to advise you from an informed place. We sit down face to face. You'll tell me your budget, and I'll say to you, what are you expecting to include in that budget?
So with the budget, how I've had discussions with builders in particular where they really struggle to get the client to say what their budget is. And I don't know whether it's clients thinking that the builder's just going to make it the price fit the budget. But do you have a problem getting budgets out of people?
Sometimes it depends on. There are still some people out there that think if they just tell you the bare minimum of what they've got, that they're going to get the result that they want. So the first question I ask is that your build budget or is that your project budget? Because I need to know the build budget. That's what you work out, right? So so I need to benchmark somebody's expectations and aspirations against what it's actually going to cost to build. The more, I tell people, the more honest you are with me, the more I can help you. My fees aren't percentage based on the project value.
Which I think potentially is maybe one of the concerns when
yes,
fees are.
100%. And I get asked that question and I answer it really honestly, because I say to people, look, if you're going to put a granite benchtop in your kitchen and brass taps in your bathroom, why should I get paid more? Because I'm not actually doing anything for it. But if your project requires more consideration in terms from an energy perspective, then that's the value of work that I'm giving to your project. So, we have this conversation. I mean, obviously, the more transparent people are with me, the easier I can help them, right? And the better the value that I can offer them. And so we work out, so say if we were talking, I'd say to you, what is your budget? And then you might say, that's my project budget. That's the maximum I can borrow from the bank to do this. And I say, okay, well, what are your aspirations? And typically someone's aspirations are always up here and their budgets, you've got to bring them into alignment with each other.
And I guess that's part of it, that with them, if they're fudging on the budget, then obviously to a greater degree, you can design to whatever, whatever dollar value you say, we can build you something for that dollar value. And so it doesn't really help anybody if you're talking down a dollar value, because you're just going to design a smaller thing or less to do it. So,
well, either they're going to end up with a design they can't afford or a design that they're disappointed in. We're trying to avoid that. Yeah. But we talk about the other consultants that are needed, because I can't tell people what the next steps are in their project if I don't actually know more about their project. And, like a renovation is slightly different to a new build. Yeah. If you're doing a passive house or a homestay, that you want to integrate that into the process. So, and if you need resource consent, that throws things out too. So you want to know what people are wanting to do, what the steps in the process are, and who else is included in that, because nobody likes a big bill from a planner that they weren't expecting and kind of building that all into. So I do a top-down or a bottom-up budget to say, just allow for maybe X amount of dollars for a structural engineer because you might have bad ground. I don't have a crystal ball, but it's just to help people make informed decisions from that point and sort of get more of a robust brief. I've watched clients end up with a concept they've fallen in love with, and then they've got the estimate.
I've got a good story on this. So it was when we first started YourQS, and this builder came to us and said, the client really loves this. I'm a bit concerned their budget's $400,000 or something, and we worked it out and it was 1.3 million. So no wonder they loved it, because if they thought they were going to get that for 400,000. Mm-hmm. So we all want to avoid those situations. It's still happening. I just had a builder a couple of weeks ago with one, the client was 100,000 in, building consent drawings, got it priced, and it was double what they could afford. And that's just don't. So how do you deal with, because you've got a dollar value, you've got an aspiration, before we can get involved, you've got to start doing something. So how do you figure out what you're going to do for that sort of money that they've got available?
The ultimate chicken and egg, right? So I go away and I give them a report after our meeting, because I need some time to digest it too. You want to give them the right answer. So I have a network of builders that I ring up, and I'll be like, so I've got this client, they wanted to do this, this, and this. And builders are pretty smart people. And I'll say describe it a little bit. And I'll say, I'm thinking about, they want an extension. It's about, say, 60 square meters. I'm thinking it's probably going to sit around maybe $4,000 a square meter. It's a really loose amount to try and see if this is going to stack up. And then they might say, Sharon, what's the access like? And can we get down there for foundations? And all of these things. So it's a little bit of a gut feel, but it's not done just off the fly, because I find things cost so much more than what I initially thought. And maybe 15 years ago, I had a pretty good handle on it, but we're seeing so many fluctuations.
The last few years, it has moved so much.
Yeah. So it's not a perfect science, obviously, but it is the chicken and egg, because you need to kind of have an idea of that before you do drawings, and then you need a design done first before you can put figures to it. So it's trying to move it in the general right direction.
So when you're working on a passive house, then what's different about your process with that?
Not much, because passive house and homestay have to be part of the design process. So building better is a similar design process to building minimum. It's just that you use your energy modeling software as a design tool in the initial stage to check whether the tweaks in the design need to be. So more consideration in the design, but it's not an add-on. I think when we start treating homestay and passive house as add-ons to the process, we're going to make them very expensive and very inefficient. So
you sort of designed a house, and then you check to see if it's passive or check to see if it's homestay, and suddenly you've got to go back and do a whole lot of changes.
Yeah, 100%.
Because it misses by miles or whatever. Yeah.
So having that expectation in the beginning at a design consultation is super, because you can say these are the credits that we'll be going for in Homestar. So let's integrate as much of that into the actual design, which is the cheapest place to achieve it. So it just becomes an integrational part. Obviously, when it comes to the certification part, there's extra evidence and extra drawings that need to be made to be submitted to the likes of Sustainable Engineering or the New Zealand Green Building Council. But it's not a massive additional step that you have to take. Yeah.
So when it comes to the environmental considerations, so we're talking about Homestar, that brings that sort of environmental part of it into it. So how does that affect your decision making when you're working on a job?
So I have my own range of pre-design concepts, which you've been pricing, the small smart spaces, and I consider those environmental considerations right from the start. So in a way, I was the client for that. So my considerations were, can we do off-site products as much as possible, because that's a way of waste management, and also in terms of resource efficiencies and quality. Are they New Zealand-based companies? I'm a big fan of supporting local. So I looked at that with the sort of the choices of the people and products that I wanted to use, and considering embodied carbon. So I really do try and stay away from sort of steel or metal products as much as possible. From an efficiency point of view, they can become problematic. But also from an embodied carbon point of view, they can become problematic too. So if the client asks for my input, I will totally give it to them on all of those things. But I still have to respect the fact that if someone is absolutely hell bent on using something, it is their project. Yeah, so you have to work around it. Yeah. So I try and steer them in the right direction. Yeah.
And so how do you manage balancing their expectations with the budget then? So you've got these expectations, you've come up with this thumbsuck idea of what you think you can achieve for it. When you get to the point of the rubber hitting the road and you're starting to get some numbers, feedback on it, sort of how do you start dealing with that difficult discussion with the clients?
Difficult discussion. I really love it when a builder comes in right from the start. Having a builder in the design consultation is gold, because it's just someone to start bringing that kind of cost and experience from the site works into the conversation. But say if there isn't, you've then got to highly recommend getting it a high level estimate at the end of developed design. Obviously you need a certain amount of information to be able to make those calls and put those figures to it. But so it depends on how people want to move it. Some people aren't that fussed. If the budget's super light, then sometimes you just have to go, well, it is what it is. Or if people need the work done and it's sort of super critical, you say, well, you're going to have to do this. Don't muck around. But I recommend to clients, get an elemental estimate at this point. Like just get a check on where this is sitting before we go into that super detailed, expensive, developed design, building consent documentation stage.
I'm smiling because I think we got approached with one client who'd spent $26 million buying their section, and we're designing a house, and they said, we've been told we should get a QS. And I said, well, we could tell you an idea of what you're looking to do, but will it change your thinking? Will it change your mind about what you do? And wouldn't. So what's the point? You're going to do it anyway. So it's only, obviously they want information to be able to make better decisions. And if you're not going to change your mind because you've got the numbers, then there's no point in getting a QS. You might as well just carry on. But if you're trying to make things balance out and you want some confidence around the numbers, then it makes sense.
100%. It depends how long the project's been going for as well. But because some people would say, well, we could have borrowed 300,000 or 500,000 or 700,000 4 years ago when we started down this process, because not everything, it's not done in a day. And then that's a really good price point for them to go back to their bank, because some of that lending would only be conditional for a year. So it depends on what the requirements are of the project to how you deal with it. But having price checks along the way, I recommend it, because I don't want them to get to the end and sort of have this massive meltdown. I've talked to builders who do charge up work, and they say, what's the point of getting a QS? And I say, well, the worst thing you want to be is 80% of the way through the project, but 100% way through their money. And the sooner you know that, and you've got an idea up front, you can set an expectation. And particularly the banks don't like a project being partially completed and then the owner coming back for more money, and then they're going to say, well, is this the only time you're going to come back, or are you going to come back again in the future? So having
that good idea up front, I think
100%.
makes the whole thing work.
Yeah, and none of us have a crystal ball, but it's just we really care about, or I really care about my clients actually getting to the end. I want to see my projects realized. So how do I need to work with this in order to make it happen? Yeah, 100%.
So you mentioned the Green Building Council before. So what's your involvement with them and what do they bring to the offer that you make to your clients?
So I don't work for the New Zealand Green Building Council, but I am a homestar professional. So I have a homestar designers accreditation with them, and also I'm a homestar assessor with them. So
it's a cooperative, isn't it? If I remember correctly. Or a member organisation.
It is a member organisation, yes, but you don't have to be a member to have those qualifications. So it's a bit like the LBP license with MB. So I have a CPD requirement for them that to ensure that I'm upholding my end of doing my assessments.
Right.
I also have an eco license, so I can use which is their energy modelling software, which is fabulous. So I am accredited to be able to put projects into Echo, which is a requirement of Homestar version 5, and also to collate information and submit it to the New Zealand Green Building Council for a Homestar rating. I can do that on my own projects. I can do it for other people's projects as well. And I've been trained on how to collate all that evidence to make the whole process quite efficient through New Zealand Green Building Council and for the auditor at the other end, because they don't know what this project's all about. And so it's my job to highlight to them what credits we're going for and where that information is, and then also give them evidence during the build process that has happened.
And I guess they provide you with training and resources and support in doing what you're doing.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. That's good. So you've been in designing for quite a while. We won't touch on how long. So over time you must have seen technology change a lot. So how's that affected what you do and how you work?
How I work. So I was really lucky when I started my career working for a little housing company for a short period of time. I was trained in ArchiCAD. I think it was version 8. I'm dating myself now. So the guy that actually came in and taught me ArchiCAD was a guy called Glenn Richardson, who actually went on to work for CAD Image with their bracing tool. So I really luckily got this incredible resource. And I really loved ArchiCAD. So I kept finding jobs that I could work in ArchiCAD, and I always drew in 3D. So I learnt early on to design in 3D. I mean, I need to sketch something out to sort of get my head around how it's going to just thresh out some ideas. But I just learnt this skill of being able to design onto the computer relatively quickly, because I watched people go from hand sketches to SketchUp to then putting it. And I thought, oh God, that's it. Can we not just get one thing to do it all? And doing it in 3D, I really loved, because if a window changed or a client wanted to move something, it would knock onto all of the drawings. So it was a really good, effective way of checking for those sort of mistakes. And now in my business, I deliver my concept and develop designs in 3D with a walk-around model for clients, because I've realized that only 30% of the population can actually visualize what a plan is creating and what a section is creating. And there's nothing worse than going on to site and a client going, oh, I didn't think it was going to look like that. So it gets their emotional involvement in it. It gets their investment in it, and they can see themselves in the spaces, because we're not creating an object. We're creating spaces that these guys are going to live in. You don't appreciate your house from across the road, staring at it for most of the time. You appreciate
or from vertically down.
Or vertically down. You're in it. It's how you use it. So that's how I deliver it. And so fly-throughs and renders and 3D walkthroughs, they just have become part of how I deliver. So I was really lucky. I didn't have to learn all of that.
So
through my career.
As the technologies evolved, because obviously ArchiCAD 8, you could do fly-throughs, but I don't think there was, and certainly wasn't anything web delivered. So sort of over time they've developed or bought things that they've added into it. So I guess it's changed what you're delivering to your clients.
Yeah, it's made it easier. And more advanced and more interactive. So
it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
So good note here just to talk about the joint and severally liable thing. Have you heard about the changes the government's looking to make on those? What impact do you think it's going to have for you, and do you think it's a good thing?
I'm on the fence about it. It is what it is. I can see why they are I can see the government's approach on it. It's interesting. I was having a conversation with Joe Lyth yesterday, and this came up. There's a couple of things that I think the industry needs to do in order to respond to it. Firstly, as I mentioned, I actually had a project where I had continuous ventilation and air tightness in it. It wasn't a homestyle project. It wasn't a passive house project. It was just an extension to an existing family house. They wanted a good quality, healthy extension. I wasn't involved for on-site observation. The builder took out the air tightness, changed the windows, and took out the continuous ventilation. But because of the changes that he'd made were not the minimum requirements of the building code, council signed it off. So that client...
So it still exceeded the code. So it was still code compliant, you're saying?
It didn't exceed it. It just met it.
Met it, okay.
Right. Yeah. So if we're going to talk about designers taking that responsibility, we need to be involved in the on-site observation. And Joe and I were talking about the almost the insistence of it with our projects, and just saying, if you come to us, this is the complete package, that the quality of what we are promising and talking about in the beginning to be delivered requires that, because there are some builders that will cut corners and just do the minimums, and we want to. Council's not going to be there as your safeguard, but they've never really been there in any case. So there's been a public perception that they have. It's going to be really interesting to see how that sits with builders' PI insurance, because most architects and designers I know carry PI insurance already. So from that point of view, I think that'll be however it impacts. But from a builder's point of view, how is that going to be enforced with the Master Builder's Guarantee or the HALA Guarantee? So
my take on it is slightly different. That under the jointly and severally liable, you're actually liable for those changes that the builder made right now, and under the current regime, because of this jointly. So effectively, the jointly and severally means that everybody's equally liable for everything. And so if something goes wrong, whoever it is that is suing can actually sue everybody, and effectively the last person. Generally the smaller organisations disappear, and that's why a lot of it's ended up back on the councils. So what the change they're talking about doing is going to be proportionately liable. So in that example that you've talked through, because you weren't making those changes, you couldn't be liable for them. Whereas and I'm certainly not a lawyer, my understanding under the current regime is because of the jointly and severally liable thing, everybody is liable for it. So I think it actually makes your position as a designer better, because it's narrowing it down to what you're responsible for. Potentially,
because it's interesting, because the feedback from council, and I won't say which one it was actually like, no, because the builders made these changes, you're not liable. So there's a lot of grey area.
Realism come in. If it went to court, the judges may, you went and changed it. They may take a different view of it, but that jointly and severally liable thing is where I think one of our fundamental issues has been in the building industry. And because the council is effectively the only organisation that's likely to always be there, they've ended up, from my point of view, with a disproportionate amount of the liability because they continue to exist. And what we've seen as a reaction in the industry, they've reacted to that as they're wearing it by being more and more pedantic with the consenting process and the documentation and your ability to change things, because they're trying to protect themselves to make sure things don't go wrong. That's good and it's bad. Like we work in Australia as well, and they don't have the same thing over there, and the consent documentation is more like concept drawings for what we would get here. And when we first started working there, I was thinking, well, how do these people build? Does the builder just, they know that's the detail that you use and that's how you're going to build it? I struggled to get my head around how it works. And so I think that while the government sort of indicated this change, I think there's still a number of hurdles to get through. And I think you touched on insurance, that's going to be one. Is that I remember talking to the regulatory authorities in the UK and Scotland. Actually, I met with the Ministry of Building in Scotland and talked about our consenting in theirs. And one of the differences over there is that councils don't get any of that liability. If they see a problem, they write to the homeowner and say, we've seen a problem, you've got to fix it. That none of the liability ends up back on the councils. And when I started talking through, and they didn't do any inspections, you could carry on building. They might do some inspections, but if they didn't turn up and you carried on, you could carry on. But it turned out the people that were doing the inspections were the insurance companies. So the builder had to have insurance, and the inspectors were coming in through the process. So it changed the dynamic. And I think that's something that would, for what they're talking about, they're going to have to figure out that insurance side of things.
Yeah, it's been something that I've raised a couple of times with people with around the insurance part, because it's also underwriters, and what are the underwriters going to say, and what is that insurance going to look like? Because ultimately that's a cost that might get passed on to the homeowner. So I think if anything, this conversation has highlighted they've still got a little bit more work to do on it. And so, and you know, the existing system hasn't been perfect, so something had to be done to sort of tidy it up. So hopefully there are some solutions, right?
A better outcome,
because we don't want you and I don't want to see clients with a leaky home either from external moisture or from internal moisture or poor workmanship. You know, that's not why we're in the game. So we'll see.
Are there any other burning issues you'd like to raise? Anything else?
No, I think probably the insurance one is the latest one. We'll wait till the next one.
We're just touching on the Aussie thing again. That was one of it was an issue a few years ago where the insurance companies were pulling out, and I'm not close enough to know what happened, but I do remember hearing quite a bit where they were having issues getting, because over there, certainly the construction insurance is part of it, and they had quite a few of the insurers pulling out. I think it's been solved now, but I think it took some government intervention to actually make it work, because the insurers just were not happy with the risk that we're getting from it. So
another to throw another layer on that, you know, banks are looking at, like ANZ were looking at Homestar as a way of satisfying their carbon requirements. So we're going to see sort of that start to come in with the operating and embodied carbon, because you know, we've got the Paris Accord agreement and all of that. So how's that all going to play into it? So, you know, we might get it right for a little bit with this whole thing with insurance, and it might have to change a little bit more. So the evolution of our industry.
Well, thanks, Sharon. It's been great having a chat with you. I really appreciate it. And I've certainly learned some things. So thanks, everybody, for listening. If you want to deal with a QS that really understands building costs and how to optimize the building process, then get in touch with YourQS. If you want to talk to a designer who can create spaces that people live in and enjoy for the budget that they can afford, then get hold of Sharon at Smart Living Spaces. Thank you.